How's it going? It's Travis Mortz. I'm down in the dark room once again. Try to make it down here a couple times a week, and I decided to take this time to talk about another one of my cameras while some of the film's processing. Today we're going to be talking about the Konica Hexar AF. This is an autofocus rangefinder, and this camera is a real treat to use, and a lot of people don't know about it. So basically, just want to bring it to you guys' attention and let you guys know about it. So we're going to do a little bit of talking about that, and I'll show you guys some examples and show you what this little camera could really do. So here we've got the Konica Hexar AF, and the reason I bought this camera was I was planning on going on a 2-week trip to Europe, and I was definitely going to bring my Hasselblad, but I also wanted like a 35mm camera that gave me the control that I wanted, but also the ease of use that a point and shoot would have. So I did some searching. I looked at the Contax G1 rangefinder. I was looking at the Leica Mini Lux. I looked at the Nikon 35 Ti, and I looked at I found out about this Konica Hexar AF in my search process. So a lot of these cameras I've noticed are located in Japan, and they tend to stay in Japan, so to get these cameras in the States is a little more difficult. Basically all those cameras I named, the Japan market for those cameras is really heavy, and the American market's not so much. So I was having difficulty finding pretty much any of the cameras I just listed. I was looking for a Contax G1, and due to my time restriction, I couldn't wait very long. So I was left with very little options, and I found the Konica Hexar AF. And the Hexar AF really appealed to me because it was so user-friendly, and it's so quiet, and I read a lot of good things about it. And also another thing about the Hexar is that there's not a whole lot of people that have them. In my research, I found out that Konica didn't really have any stores in the U.S. that sold their product, so only about 30 or so of these cameras were even exported to the United States when they were first made. And when these first came out, they weren't very popular with photographers because of the downfall of this camera, which is it has a maximum 250th of a second shutter speed. And because of that, it's a little bit weird, but I found one of them. I found one Konica Hexar AF in Los Angeles on eBay. I paid a little bit too much for it, but I really wanted it, so I bought it anyways, and I was able to bring this on my 2-week adventure to a couple different countries. So, anyways, I've fallen in love with the Hexar since I've bought it, despite the fact that I didn't have too many choices when I did buy it. I kind of bought it on a hope and a prayer, and I fell in love with it. This camera's got many different features. One of the main features of this camera is that it's got aperture control here, so you can actually set your aperture to be whatever you'd like, as well as it's got different automatic program modes, as you can see here. And the thing that appealed to me most about this camera was the fact that it was so quiet. This camera working even just with the normal shutter is so hardly noticeable when you take a picture that shooting street photography with it is a dream. And this camera actually has a second feature, which is called the silent mode feature. And what you could do with that is you activate the silent mode, and by activating the silent mode, the camera, it shoots a little bit quieter, and it winds very quiet. So the camera is basically completely silent when taking a picture. So I just managed to put the camera into silence mode, and when it's in silent mode, the Konica Hexar claims that this is the quietest camera in the world. This camera came out in the early 90s, and like I mentioned, it wasn't very popular among photographers, but the one claim that it had was that this is the quietest camera in the world, quieter than a Leica, quieter than anything else, and I think it's pretty easy to agree with that, just based on the fact that you can't hear the camera working right now. Just in the time that I've had my eye up to the frame, I took 3 or 4 photos, and because of that, there's no I haven't found a better camera for street photography than this. I could be on a bicycle riding by and, you know, shoot photos from the hip with autofocus and completely silent. You know, I've walked by people that are just looking at me and have no idea that I'm taking their picture. So as creepy as that may sound, all the street photographers out there would love to hear that. The fact that this camera is so quiet. Just took another picture. And I'm gonna get this thing under the microscope and give you guys a closer look at some of the buttons and functions on this, and show you the inside. And it's a very simple camera. There's not a whole lot to say about it, but it's very underrated. I feel like a lot of people don't know about this camera, and I think they should. So we're gonna look at this camera a little bit closer. Here we've got the Konica hexar AF. And as you can see on the top of this camera, it's really a pretty straightforward system. We've got this dial here. What this dial does is it lets you choose what you want to shoot, what aperture you want to shoot at, and the camera will do its best to accommodate that. Now, what I mean by that is this camera has a maximum shutter speed of 1/250th of a second. So, because of that, you know, if you're shooting a 400 ISO film, shooting wide open is not going to be an option, and really you're going to be limited to what apertures you can use, because, you know, sunny 16 outside at 400 ISO, you're going to be shooting, you know, 22, and that's a real issue with this camera, is that it's really best suited for slow speed films. For those of us who shoot 100 ISO or 50 ISO all the time like I do, it's not that big of a deal. But for people who like a faster speed film, this camera probably would not be for you. So what happens here is when you set your aperture to whatever you want to use, it's going to give you a shutter speed. So you see it's saying 1/30th and it's blinking. What that means is that this camera is going to shoot slower than it really wants to. And we'll turn it out this way because that's actually facing out the door. You see it's going to give us our desired shutter speed. And the interesting thing about this camera is if it's going to be 250th of a second, and that's the shutter speed, then it's actually going to display the aperture to you. So if the exposure is 250th, you see it shows us the aperture instead, and it tells us, hey, the maximum aperture we can shoot at is 2.4, even though you have it set to 2. And so this camera is always giving you the information you need. It's either going to tell you what aperture you're shooting at or what shutter speed you're shooting at. And you could obviously see here it's saying the most I could shoot it at is f2, and that's what it's going to shoot at because I'm in priority mode. Set it on aperture mode, and it will do its best to accommodate what you're asking for, but that might mean slow shutter speeds, you see. So I typically like to shoot this camera in aperture priority. It's easiest that way. Sometimes program's great also. Some of the things that this camera also has is we'll show you how to activate silent mode. Hold the manual focus button. This L right here indicates silent mode. Great. And then if we press select here, we can change our exposure compensation up to 2 stops. And actually I think it goes plus 3 stops. Let's see. It's only 2 stops. And then this manual focus, if you press it once, it'll go to infinity, and then you could change it from there. It's really a chintzy system. I wouldn't really bother with the manual focus if I were you. As you can see, this camera has a built-in hood, which is pretty nice. We can see our lens here. It's a very simple Konica hexar 35mm f2. You see our finder here. And that's about, I mean, this camera is very simple. Well, this actually has the date back as well, which I've never used, and you'll probably never use either. But because of this date back, I know that only 30 of these were imported because it was written down somewhere that only 30 of the dated back Konica hexar AFs were imported into the States. As you can see, the inside of this camera is very simple to load. It has a DX code reader, so you could just slap any roll of film in here and your camera's going to know exactly what it is, and it's really all there is to it. It's a great camera. The battery for it is a 2CR5, I believe. And I've shot countless rolls of film with this battery, and it hasn't died yet. So I really love that. The battery life of this camera is excellent. I think it says that you can shoot 75 rolls or so. I don't know how many, but a lot of rolls of film before the battery will die, which is really excellent. There we go. Some other great stuff about this camera is the lens. This camera's got a fixed 35mm f2 lens. And the thing I love about this camera is that it's an autofocus rangefinder, so you get all the same joys of shooting a rangefinder, but you don't have to worry about the focus. And sometimes focusing a rangefinder can be a real pain, and it's nice to have that autofocus there because, why not? So one of the things it does is when it autofocuses, the frame lines actually move to make up for parallax distortion based on your focusing distance. So your frame lines will move depending on how far away your subject is, and it gives you a very, very accurate representation of what's going to be in your frame, as well as showing you what's going to be on the outside of your frame, so you could change up your shot midway through. The interesting thing about this camera is that the autofocus and the metering is all done right here. It's not done through the lens. So because of that, you have to be very careful not to cover this with your hand, because the camera will have difficulty shooting because it won't know what the light or the distance of your subject is. But another great thing this camera has, it's got a fully functioning hot shoe, and it's got all these little, there's a whole bunch of little things you could change about the camera's operation, like the camera's minimum shutter speed. You could set it to 15th of a second, 30th, 60th, and then therefore the camera, when in automatic mode, won't go below those shutter speeds. Additionally, it's also got exposure compensation, so if you want to overexpose or underexpose your frame a little bit, you could do that. The camera is really, really silent, and because of that, the street photography with this thing is phenomenal. Half the time I shoot pictures of people, they don't even know that I took one, because it's so quiet. If you're about 5 or 10 feet away from this camera, you can't hear what it's doing at all. And once you put it in silent mode, which this camera offers, the camera literally makes no noise at all. It looks like I gotta go switch out my fixer. I'll be right back. So naturally, when I got this camera, I was dying to shoot some street photography with it because I really wanted to get used to the camera for my upcoming trip. So I went out and I focused a lot on shooting people and trying to see really how discreet I could be with this camera. And having shot multiple rangefinders in the past, Leica rangefinders, Nikon, Contax, I already had a feel of shooting people in the streets, and I also had a feel for shooting a camera of this size, and so I had something to compare it to. And hands down, this is the best street photography camera I've ever used. This is one of the cameras that I've never even really thought of getting rid of because it's been such a useful tool. It's really great for all sorts of things, and also it's really great to hand to a friend if you need a photo taken or something like that, because it's such an easy to use camera that anybody can pick it up and take some great photos with it. And I always like that in a camera. I always like being able to hand it to a friend of mine and ensure that I'm going to get a good shot out of it. So what I want to do is I want to show you guys some examples of what this camera can really do, because the quality of the photos that it delivers really astonished me. The sharpness that it has, and the camera's ability to really read the light perfectly and really have my back there was really impressed by that. I was really impressed by that with this camera, and I've been wanting to do a review on it, but I loaned it to a buddy of mine, and he actually took it on a 3-week trip to Washington, where he put many rolls through it, I'd have to assume, as well. And this camera is a true workhorse, and it's very subtle, and I think it's been overlooked a lot. So anyways, check out some of these examples. So here we've got a few shots that I took before leaving on my trip. I tried to take this camera everywhere with me and shoot it in all sorts of scenarios. This is just, I got lunch one day and I really wanted to test the focus limits of this camera as well as the auto exposure ability. Um, Here's a shot in Los Angeles, and this is just something that I came across while the camera was on my back. And it's just so nice being able to have a camera with you at all times because it's so light and discreet. As you can see, the Konica did not disrupt this guy when he was sleeping. And here's actually a few photos from my Europe trip. As you can see, I had the ability to shoot people without being acknowledged, and because of that, it gave me an opportunity for some really great shots because I'm really on the outside looking in. You can see from a lot of these shots the detail and the sharpness that this lens has to offer, as well as the anonymity of it. You could tell that most of the people in my photographs don't notice that they're being photographed, and that's really a great thing. That's something that I look for. As you can see here, the auto exposure ability is spot on. This was shot on 50 ISO Fuji Velvia. And to finalize it, I've got a nice portrait here. You can see the sharpness of his jacket and the tone. It's a great camera. I hope you guys enjoyed some of those examples. Like I said, this camera is really, really a great camera for just about anything, but it thrives in the street photography aspect. This is a true street photography machine. And because of that, if there's anyone out there who's been looking for a good camera for street photography, I suggest you do a little research on the Konica Hexar AF because it made my street photography go to a whole new level because of the ability I had to be silent and not noticed. So anyways, thanks again for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And I look forward to making the next video for you guys. Thanks again.